Hello, everyone. This is our Chapter 5 lecture. This is the middle one-third of the material we need to cover. And when we return to classes next week, whether it's Monday or Tuesday, depending on your section, we'll pick up with the last one-third of the material. So before I do go over the lecture material, I want to review the new rubric for peer grading. And so what you'll need to do is take a look at this, and you'll need to print out this and bring it with your assignment that you will have peer graded. So you will have this page in addition to your assignment that you're having graded on Monday or Tuesday. So it's fairly simple. I think I'd made some assumptions about or had not thought through some of the details of our peer grading. Hopefully all that has been advantageous for you and your grades at this point. However, what continues to be a problem is folks remembering to put their name or their name as the grader on whatever assignment they're grading. So use this tool. The grader will put their name in the beginning here, and then a few lines down. Then the person whose assignment this is, so the assignment you're grading, who does it belong to? So the first two things that have been a continuous problem is, in part of being prepared, I expect that you all will have stapled your assignment, and if it has no name, then of course you will not be able to put the name in there, but you will minus 5 points for no name and minus points for not being stapled. Tally those points here. Notice that it's 5 points each, and the total amount of points available for the assignment is 10 points. So, and then you'll work through each of the questions, and then you may want to consider, this is just a helpful guide, did they attempt it? Did they attempt it but did not complete? So then if it's completed 100%, then you might give a check mark here. Did they get the answer correct? And then the points that are going to be deducted are listed in this final column, this E column here. At the end of going through all 10 questions, we want to tally up all the points deducted in this area here for total points deducted. Okay, and then I'm asking you to kind of self-reflect on how good you did as a grader. We discussed before some of the things you can do is lead them to the correct answer, help them with the correct answer, show if you can tell where they did well and where they did not do well, particularly maybe if you could point out their mistake. So do you feel like you did a 4 out of 10 job, a 5 out of 10 job, or maybe you didn't do a good job and you want to give yourself 1 point out of 10? Whatever you think your grade is, put it there, and then I will take that into consideration once I assign your grade for peer grading. So there's some instructions at the bottom to make sure you all are, just to remind you to print this out and bring it with you when you conduct your peer grading. So you'll have an extra sheet in addition to your assignment sheets that are stapled and have their name on it. And then lastly, I'm going to, there's a reminder here for me to add a note. So if the person whose assignment this is, if they did not turn in their item on time in the folder, I'm going to take a look, and it will have in big red letters, it will tell me if their item was delivered late in the assignment folder. So I will deduct 5 points, or half the points available for that. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me, and we'll do this. We're going to try something different. We're going to do this at the end of the class period this time instead of the beginning of the class period. So if you have any questions on that, please email me or call me or stop by for office hours, and I'll try to help out with that. Now, the next thing we need to do is to go over the material. Oh, I want to mention one other thing, which is I'm going to post an assignment for you. It's fairly simple. There'll be a reference, which is going to be a school budget, a school nutrition budget. And you'll be able to look on there and find the pieces of information I'm asking for, and then conduct a few calculations. It's somewhere between 5 and 10. I don't remember exactly how many. But the total assignment is worth 10 points. Fairly easy, but the expectation is that you will have that completed by either Monday for section 1 or Tuesday for section 2 when you come to class. Again, any questions, what I will do is post the reference and post the questions in the same section that we're on now, which is that chapter 5 section near the bottom of the As You Learn page. So, and if you have any questions about that along the way, please feel free to email me, call me, whatnot. So let's go ahead and move on to our lecture material. And let me turn on the wide view, slideshow view. And so what we're going to pick up is, this may be a little repetitious, a little bit of information we're going over a second time. But what we want to do is remind everyone that we're in the chapter that talks about monitoring and controlling. And so when we're doing this and we're putting forth effort to protect our ingredients from possible loss, we need a system that controls those resources coming out of storage. And any system needs to follow some ground rules, and these are the ground rules for the system we would put in place. It can look a lot of different ways, but it needs to follow these basic principles. And first and foremost, we want to make sure that anything coming out of storage has been approved by the manager as needed to be implemented that day. And we said before that the production schedule is the communication tool that tells the employees that it's okay to take those things out of storage. The production schedule is also going to tell the amount that needs to be taken out of storage. So those two items are covered first. And then we go to steps 3 and 4, which basically tell us that if we're going to use some kind of written record method, that there needs to be some way to acknowledge a particular person received those items out of storage, and that in the documentation, that person will sign or initial indicating that they've received those items. And then lastly, the last ground rule is that any unused product along the way as we get into production needs to return back to storage if it's going to go unused, not wasted, but there's going to be some way to get it back into storage and document that as well. So we want to ask ourselves, what is the appropriate level of control for removing products from storage? And is documentation enough? Is just simple documentation enough? Or might it be advantageous for us to have additional personnel there controlling a process of things coming out of storage? Is that going to be a requirement? And recall that we said that some of the basic reasons we would want to have a higher level of control is when ingredients are expensive or the profit margin on the item we're going to make with those ingredients is relatively high. Other reasons might be that we have continuously missing product, maybe it's being stolen, or maybe we have excessively high food cost percentage. Those things might lead us to decide to have a different system of documentation or different personnel to help us control the process of removing items from storage. If a higher level of control is determined to be necessary, then additional expenses for cameras or even hiring additional personnel would be justified in that case. Once we do decide to have additional personnel added or have additional processes in place in the storeroom, it becomes its own ordering unit. And much of those processes we talked about previously of submitting requests to replenish your amounts becomes the responsibility of the person in charge of the storage area. So they're going to be sending requests to the purchasing clerk with the goal of replenishing their stock of items. So now they're going to be the person responsible for all the ordering, documentation, and processes. So once we have this in place, what we need to do is say, okay, there's other problems. Now, how do we track those down? How can we be a good detective? How can we find out what's going on? And there are some basic problems that come up in issuing products out of storage. And one way we can work through these, you and I, is to look at issues that happen in beverage storage. It's a little bit simpler, and it can illustrate some of the problems that will carry over to other categories of food. And again, this is going to involve liquor and wine. Okay. We talked previously about the empty for full system, or at least one of the sections we talked about this briefly. And the point here is that at the end of the shift, we'll be able to count the number of units that was used during that shift. Just another way to control the process. Additionally, we can use a system that marks or stamps the particular bottles that are going to be used. Again, one of the things we're trying to avoid is any creative use of resources. Say, for example, the bartender may bring in their own product, leave the owner, the company's product on the shelf, but continue to make sales and pocket all the money from that product that they brought in. In a sense, running their own bar off their particular person while using the facility. So we want to have these systems in place, such as the full system replacement or the mark and stamp system, to help avoid those particular circumstances, or to help us detective out and find when something's going wrong. Also for wine, we mentioned before, wine is selections of wine are variable. We may have a good idea of the percentage of customers who are going to select wine, but based on taste and what the restaurant or what the facility has available, someone may decide different, whether they pick a Pinot Noir or a Sauvignon. So it just depends, and that's much more variable. But what we do need to do for wine issues is to make sure we document when the bottle comes out of the cellar or the storage area and where it's going to be used at. And this is an example of documentation. We want to mention again that just the number of units, well, this is for liquor requisition, and the number of units is recorded, what size it is, and but what's not listed here is the cost, because monitoring cost is either going to be left to the storeroom personnel or a management designee. And just to point out here that this is a document that would be, in this particular case, for Scotto's Dinner Club, is basically that it is verified by a management person, and another example of controlling. Here we have our wine issues. just a document to track when wine's leaving the storage area and to where it's going. Here they have the check number listed on theirs, and they have remarks at the bottom in case it's going to the kitchen for preparation of a particular menu item. So the issuing system allows us to track all that we intend to use. And once we have that basic information, we can use that to manage the expenses, which brings us to our 6-column cost estimate. Here what we have is a summary of the beverage issues by the value. And the point here is that we can't tell a lot from this particular summary. We might be able to tell we might expect that Fridays and Saturdays are particularly busy, so maybe we have more sales on those days. For example, we can tell the highest day by value was the 5th at $15.95.50. And the lowest day, $18.40. Whatever happened on maybe that Sunday, only $18 in sales. So the highest and lowest day is about all we can figure out, and maybe kind of infer that we were busier that time period, and that equates to that, to those higher sales. Not much else we can do. So what we need to do is add additional information so that it becomes more useful to what we're trying to do. And what we have here, you all may recall, this is the same format. We used the 6-column format previously, and it follows this in a similar way here. And for this unit, the Irish Pub, we're going to have the first the date, then the next 2 columns are going to contain the issues, divided either by today, the single amounts for that particular day, or the cumulative amount across the period. So we're just going to add those on top of each other as we go. The same for sales on the next 2 columns, today and to date. And then lastly, a formula we're going to put into place. So this is a cost estimate, and it's important to note here in the title that it says estimate. And I want you to disregard this bottom portion from subtotal down for now, and just concentrate on these portions up here. And what we have is, once we have each of these amounts for the day, we can provide the formula to complete the beverage cost estimate. And what we're going to divide is the issue amount by the number of sales, by the dollar amount of the sales, to give us the beverage cost estimate here. And we're going to do it for today using each of these columns, here under issues and here under sales. And then we can do the same thing for the to-date amount, and here for the beverage cost estimate, 65.2%. So the thing is try to look at this and see if you can find some trends. And some things that come up fairly quickly is that each daily beverage cost estimate ranges has a wide range. And what we can see is that over time, as we accumulate our sales and as we accumulate our issues, what happens is the beverage cost estimate starts to level out into somewhere in the mid-30s to high 30s, okay? And what we can do with that estimate is make some decisions and realize some trends. But remember, this is only an estimate. To get the actual number of issues we had, what we have to do is wait until we do something. And we've covered this before when we talked about perpetual inventories versus physical inventories. So I wonder if you all can remember what it is you have to do when you're estimating your inventory. What do you have to do to make sure it's correct or to adjust it? The physical inventory, that's what we have to do. And so that's what the bottom portion of this tool is for. And what we have to do is make an adjustment to the estimate. Once we have the exact inventory amount, once we've counted, we can adjust the numbers. So what we have here is if the ending inventory is higher than the beginning, what will happen is we'll then subtract the difference from the subtotal, okay? And if the ending inventory is lower than the beginning, then we're going to add the difference to the subtotal. Okay, so that's our adjustment. And here's where we make our adjustment. This next to the last row here where it says plus or minus, that's where we're going to do our addition or a subtraction. So let's navigate over here. And here we can see separated out are the formulas. And I want to reiterate that in many ways, the estimate is similar to a perpetual inventory, an ongoing estimate of how much we have exactly at that period. Again, it's only an estimate. Here is our formula, issues today divided by sales today, and a similar format for to date. Now, we hope that we can maintain our inventory at levels that will not impact our customers very much. But it does happen, it does exist, and there are particular reasons that the inventory varies. Here are a few. As we said early in the course, a perpetual inventory must be verified or adjusted with a physical count. And that is going and putting hands on, eyes on the actual product to verify that it exists and it's where we think it should be. Once we make this adjustment with the physical count, we can add the cost, we can add the adjustment to the 6-column beverage cost estimate. And once we do that, we can use that amount, those amounts to make additional calculations. And here is the formula. We already talked about this. This is the written steps for adjusting the estimate. So at the bottom of the 6-column estimate, there was an area for making an adjustment where you added or subtracted, and these are the steps to adjust the estimate. So just to go over it real quickly again, if the ending inventory, the physical count, is lower than the beginning, we're going to add the difference. If the ending inventory, the physical count, is higher than the beginning inventory, then we're going to subtract the difference. And this is the formula that does exactly what we were just saying. Issues to date plus or minus the adjustment, and plus or minus is dictated on these conditions that we went over here. So just to be clear, inventory amounts aren't static. They don't stay the same every month from month to month. It mirrors your customers coming in during the different seasons, etc. So inventory amounts will and should fluctuate. But the better we monitor the levels and replenish or add back to the storage accordingly, the better able our production staff in the kitchen will be able to avoid being out of particular products and ultimately help us keep our customers happy. So this is just a review of the two approaches of managing inventory we talked about before, physical and perpetual inventory. If anyone needed a little review on those. So perpetual inventory is popular with liquor and wine because why? Because we want a tight control over liquor and wine because these items, we know when we sell them, they'll have a very high profit margin, and so they're especially valuable to us. So on a regular basis, daily, we want to have a good idea of how much we have available. So this is a kind of an old idea, but you may see it. The concept will translate into electronic spreadsheets. So the idea is a bin card. Originally, it was an index card. And essentially what it is the details of additions or deletions to the inventory level as you proceed through time. And you could easily do this on a spreadsheet. But this is different from a perpetual inventory card because bin cards do not have the item's price. And this is a simple way to do this. If you don't have a lot of resources, you just have some 3x5 cards, you have something you want to track on a regular basis, you can do this and have everybody update as there's changes to the inventory of the items. And then also, just like any other perpetual inventory, we want to check in on a regular basis because mistakes happen. And particularly with manual systems, where someone is entering, transferring amounts, mistakes happen. People are butterfingers. Sometimes they are distracted. So we need a moment in time to compare what's actually there, actually in inventory, with what's on the card. Just another way to monitor and to check in with our inventory levels. Here's an example of a bin card. Again, very simple. Here we have a Canadian Club, and I just want to show you here, amount brought forward is 24. And much like we talked about before, when we have additions to or products coming into inventory, we're going to add that amount. So 24 plus 4 will give us total on hand that day of 28. And just as an example of the next step, here we had 6 bottles going out of inventory. So from that 28, we're going to subtract or take out of inventory 6 to give us the 22. And it just proceeds through time in that manner. Very simple, easy to replicate. So as we move through this process, these processes and tools, we can see how concentrating our efforts at controlling can be advantageous. Their managers have a lot going on and they need any shortcuts or any efficient ways possible to help them manage their time. So if we have limited time or energy, how can we zero in on the most important things to control? We might use the value of the item as a proxy of its importance. So, and what we have here is a hybrid system in the ABC inventory system to help us do that. It uses value as the proxy to help us understand how much effort we should put into managing the particular item. So, for example, we're going to break it into basically 3 categories. Category A is going to be the high value. It makes up about 80% of the total inventory value, not the number of items, the value of it. Okay, and then the next category, 10 to 15% of the inventory value, we're going to approach managing that differently. It's going to be kind of routine. Then lastly, category C is going to be, again, about 10%, a little less than 10% of the inventory value, but we're going to handle those differently. Our management technique, we're going to give them very simple control when we're counting those in inventory and how much effort and energy we put on those. So again, so take note here, about 80%, 10 to 15%, and 5 to 10%. There is flexibility in the system. It depends on what's right for your particular facility. So let's walk through this. How do you develop the categories? So first we need to list out all the items and have the amounts we use each month, the total amount, so monthly usage. We're going to take that usage and multiply it by the price. This sounds familiar. This is what we do when we're extending prices. And that will give us the value of the product, the dollar value of the product. Then we're going to take all those products and we're going to rank them from highest amount to lowest amount. So the ones that have the higher dollar value will be at the top, and the ones that have the lower dollar value will be at the bottom of the list. And here's an example. So, for example, 300 pounds of New York strip steak is $2,250 at the top, and dried parsley. So 4 ounces is $1 at the bottom of our list here. So the next thing we need to do is distinguish between the groups, okay? Now, our example here has well-defined breakpoints between the categories. So, for example, between chicken breasts and fresh tomatoes, chicken breasts being $945 and fresh tomatoes being $109, there's about 8 or 9, 10 times difference between those two categories. So that's an easy break. And the same can be said for the difference between rosemary sprigs and horseradish. Okay, it's about 4 times the difference between those categories. So easy to spot where the break is in this list. Okay, but what if the values were much closer together? What if it was the difference between $5.90 and $8.20 or $66 and $109? It might be harder to tell where the break is, but the point here is that the value is variable. It's the categories that make most sense for your facility. So again, it's just a guideline. It doesn't have to be at a particular point, but the rule of thumb is that about 20% of your items, let's say if you had 100 items, then the top 20 would probably be about your category A. And then the next third items would be the B category, and the last half of all items, 50 of those 100, would be your category C items. And just to summarize the overall approach to the ABC inventory control system is that the items in category A, there are a small number of items, but the product cost of those small number of items is large. And then the final category, category C, is going to have a large number of items where the total dollar value is going to be small. The value is going to be small. So again, it helps to monitor the value levels and helps management or those designees of management who are responsible for this to zero in on where their energy should be directed so we can handle the products differently. And this is a summary of those steps for each category. So these are a summary of the management techniques that I've been hinting towards as we've worked through this definition of the ABC inventory items. So we're going to have very tight control of category A items. We're going to check on them very frequently, I would say daily. And our ordering process for those is going to be very tight as well. Contrast that with C items, and we're going to order these in large amounts. They're probably going to have a long shelf life, and we'll probably never run out of these items in our stock area, storage area. And it's no problem. We can wait all the way to the end of the month until we do an eyes-on, hands-on physical count of those items. So that's a little bit of the difference to help us ferret out where we should put our time and energy. Okay. So if we take a look, we're going to take a look here at the inventory summary for Scotto's Dinner Club. And this is an example of their inventory calculations. And this is the cost of food sold that I went over with you all as we reviewed the test. And this time what we have is the items broken into each of these categories or groupings that the vendor provides. And this is quite common throughout the industry. So you all actually should have you saw this when we used the U.S. food ordering system for one of our projects. And this can be very helpful, okay? This can be very helpful to us zeroing in on particular areas we need to pay more attention to as management. So take a look at this and see if there's anything that jumps out at you, anything that looks like a trend. I will mention for me that we do have employee meal information broken down by category. And it looks at first glance like employee meals are heavy on the meat category. I don't know if that meets our guidelines for what an employee meal is, but if we do have guidelines, they may not be followed. They may not be being followed by the employees. And just one other thing I wanted to mention, if you were having some trouble or wanted additional practice with the cost of goods sold formula, here are 6 examples of the problem. You can work through those to get real familiar with it if you needed to, or if you're having any problems or concerns with it, just stop by, send me a message, and we can talk about it. So most inventory, well, it's standard for inventory software to have these categories that we saw: meat, seafood, dairy, produce. And it is helpful to managers at their efforts at controlling different costs, because you may store your dairy in one section. Your produce obviously your produce has a different level of control, monitoring, processes that you want the employees to take on. Produce is something that has a very short shelf life, so we need to be checking on a regular basis. So this is very helpful. We can track these different categories much better. And then we can also apply a formula here, a formula that we used earlier, to find the proportion of a particular category to the cost of all inventory. So typically this should come close to our menu, but if there's some things going wrong, if people are using products the way they shouldn't be, the way you have outlined it in your standardized recipes, or the way your menu lists items, then you could track it down through number one, these different categories, and number two, the category food cost percentage. So what we're going to take is the cost of the particular category and divide that by the cost of all categories to give us the proportion. So this is helpful. And here is a table format of the formula, the food cost percentage formula. And we see that the overall food cost for that particular month is 34.2%. So if we add up all these different categories, which makes up all the purchases, we get 34.2%. Again, add all of these all of these rows together to get this final amount. Now, the proportion is telling too. So of all the items we purchased, 48.3% of those were in the meat category. And recall back to the employee meals, and if we looked at that value, the proportion there was actually 60% of the overall meals. So it seems like employees might be kind of loading up on the meat. So we're going to pause this for just 1 second here.